Millionaire breaks down in court after ex-wife reveals the truth about their divorce. The court corridors buzzed with barely contained excitement and simmering curiosity. Word had spread quickly. The divorce trial of famed tech magnate Leonard Greenwood and his ex-wife, Isabel Greenwood, was about to reach its climax. Journalists from major outlets jostled for position, microphones at the ready, prepared to capture every sensational soundbite. Friends, former business partners, and a small army of onlookers crowded the wooden benches of the courtroom. They whispered about hidden fortunes, rumored betrayals, and secrets too dark to remain buried. At exactly 9 in the morning, the heavy double doors swung open. Leonard, dressed in a navy blue tailored suit that clung to his lean frame, stepped inside. The tension in the air grew thick with anticipation. Everyone expected a well-practiced performance from the millionaire entrepreneur, a man known for making deals in the penthouses of Beverly Hills and traveling across the globe with an entourage of advisors. Yet the flicker in his eyes betrayed something far more fragile than the polished persona he usually presented. That day would be different. Leonard had built an empire from scratch, an unassuming whiz-kid turned titan of the startup world. His name was once synonymous with innovation, wealth, and an almost mythic aura of success. But in the days leading up to the court proceedings, rumors emerged that his stratospheric rise was fueled by darker forces. There were allegations of shady partnerships, an obsession with controlling those around him, and a private life riddled with insidious manipulations. Now, as he locked eyes with Isabel, the entire courtroom held its breath. They could sense an oncoming storm, and with it, the promise of devastating truths finally surfacing. Leonard's roots were deceptively humble. Born in a small Midwestern town to middle-income parents, he discovered an aptitude for problem-solving at an early age. While other children played outside, Leonard pored over computers in the local library, dissecting programs line by line. The librarians marveled at the boy who lost track of time, skipping mealtimes just to quench his insatiable thirst for knowledge. So began his journey into the realm of technology that would ultimately spawn his fortune. When he was 17, Leonard won a statewide coding competition, catching the eye of a venture capitalist. Impressed by his brilliance, that investor provided Leonard with a modest seed fund, barely enough for a basic prototype. Fueled by unyielding drive, Leonard worked late into the night, forging an application that promised to revolutionize how people shared personal data online. The app, though primitive, sparked interest within the tech community. Before long, it attracted the notice of bigger investors from Silicon Valley. The hush of the library was replaced by the hum of servers in his makeshift garage workspace. It was around this time that Leonard began to chase more than just lines of code. He tasted ambition, a powerful drug that both inspired him to reach unimaginable heights and gnawed at him with a persistent fear of losing it all. He wanted more than a breakthrough product. He wanted to create a legacy. Each new investor pitch became a test of his worth. He polished every word, perfected every smile, and cultivated an image of youthful genius. Meanwhile, the young women he dated saw him as charming but restless, his brain always ticking with new ideas. Romantic relationships never lasted long in those days. He was far too preoccupied with building an empire. In time, Leonard's app caught the attention of major corporate giants. Whispers in elite boardrooms suggested that he could become the next Bill Gates or Steve Jobs. At just 25, he found himself at the head of a startup valued at tens of millions of dollars. Even more staggering was the awe-inspiring expansion that followed. Overnight, his company seemed to multiply in value, eventually surpassing the billion-dollar mark. The life of the small-town coding prodigy changed forever. By 30, he had refined the swagger of a man who held the world in his hands. He moved to Beverly Hills and purchased a sprawling modernist mansion with glass walls that overlooked the city. Next came a fleet of luxury cars, names like Rolls-Royce and Aston Martin, parked in his driveway. Expensive Rolex watches glittered on his wrist. Though Leonard told reporters he remained a humble geek at heart, each public appearance showed a glint of arrogance. He was the talk of the town, an iconic figure who appeared on magazine covers, business shows, and philanthropic galas. Yet, for all his accomplishments, Leonard felt an emptiness gnawing at him. The feeling crept in during moments of idle reflection, when he stared at the city lights, or when he realized the ephemeral nature of fame. Was it enough to be a genius inventor and a shrewd businessman? Something inside him demanded more: validation, devotion, and perhaps even subservience from those around him. That thirst only grew more dangerous as he reigned over his empire. Around this time, Isabel slipped into his life. In stark contrast to the high society women he usually encountered, Isabel was a law student, supporting herself through part-time work at a bookstore. Intelligent, poised, and with a spirited charm that could hold her own in any conversation, Isabel intrigued Leonard. She didn't fawn over his success. Instead, she engaged him in fierce debates about ethics in technology and user privacy. At first, Leonard was taken aback by her wit. Then he became smitten. Their courtship was discreet. They met in quiet restaurants tucked away from paparazzi lenses and exchanged stories about their past struggles. Leonard was drawn to her authenticity. Isabel, for her part, appreciated that beneath his polished exterior lurked a self-made man who overcame odds. She found his ambition inspiring, though a little intimidating. As weeks turned into months, Leonard's new romance seemed to fill the void he'd been grappling with. He introduced Isabel to his inner circle, inviting her to lavish events, proud to show off a partner who was neither starstruck by his celebrity nor fazed by his fortune. What started as a spark soon transformed into a blaze. Isabel saw in him more than a mogul. She saw a man grappling with the weight of expectations. She provided a grounding influence, encouraging him to remember the ideals that motivated him when he was just a kid in a library. He, in turn, offered her opportunities to expand her legal mind, bringing her into meetings with top-tier law firms and letting her observe negotiations. Their conversations weren't just about love. They were about how they could grow together, how they might shape each other's destinies. When Leonard proposed, it was in a manner befitting his flair for the dramatic. He rented out a private garden in Beverly Hills, stringing fairy lights through the trees and hiring a small orchestra to play their favorite classical pieces. Kneeling on one knee, he presented Isabel with a ring that sparkled like a mirror of the night sky. She said yes, tears glimmering in her eyes. The tabloids erupted the next day, calling it the wedding of the decade. The early years of their marriage were blissful, or so it seemed. They traveled together, from the bustling streets of Tokyo to the ancient ruins of Athens, often making surprise visits to local charities. With each philanthropic endeavor, Isabel saw glimmers of generosity in Leonard. But she also witnessed how his hunger for influence overshadowed genuine altruism. He seemed less interested in the cause and more fascinated by how these donations elevated his image. Although she tried to brush aside her discomfort, a seed of doubt took root. Still, the couple displayed a united front, with social media posts showcasing their glamorous life. Behind closed doors, fractures began to appear. Arguments over finances and project directions hinted that Leonard might see Isabel more as a protégé or even a possession than a partner. Yet, each conflict was patched up with expensive gifts, romantic getaways, or smooth words that assured her of his devotion. Isabel's friends occasionally expressed concern about the power imbalance, but she dismissed them. Love often blinds us to warning signs, and for a time she believed their relationship was built on mutual respect. As Leonard's empire continued to flourish, the media lionized him. Critics were silenced by his grand donations to universities and philanthropic funds. Meanwhile, the company soared, acquiring smaller competitors in a strategic move that solidified Leonard's grip on the market. Isabel, keen to practice law, began to question the ethics of some of these acquisitions. She worried about antitrust implications and the ways Leonard's legal team navigated loopholes. Yet each time she voiced her concerns, Leonard dismissed them as naivete. He told her she was overthinking. Slowly, these minor disagreements turned into significant chasms. Isabel began to lose faith in the man she had married. She sensed there was a side to Leonard, a controlling streak steeped in darkness that was growing stronger with each victory. Yet she still harbored hope that he might recognize his missteps. After all, she was determined to fight for the relationship, to salvage what they had built, and to stand by the ambitious dreamer she once admired. Unbeknownst to Isabel, Leonard carried secrets. Legal forms with questionable clauses, hush money payments, and the quiet silencing of certain individuals who threatened to tarnish his reputation. He had a well-oiled machine of publicists and attorneys who cleaned up his messes behind closed doors. But the more secrets he kept, the more isolated he became. His paranoia grew, and with it, so did his desire for control, especially over Isabel. The stage was set. Their once fairy tale romance was on a collision course with reality. Rumblings of an approaching storm whispered through Beverly Hills gossip circles. Friends began to notice the shift in the couple's dynamic, the tension in their eyes. Little did anyone know how cataclysmic the final revelation would be, and how deeply it would scar them both. Time has a way of unraveling facades if given the slightest opportunity. For Leonard and Isabel, the unraveling happened slowly at first, like a hairline fracture in a once polished vase. Yet every minor crack, if left unchecked, can spread until the entire structure collapses. Their arguments transformed from mere disagreements to shouting matches, culminating in an atmosphere of mutual suspicion. Isabel, now working at a respected law firm in Los Angeles, felt torn between her professional ethics and loyalty to her husband. She handled corporate cases that sometimes implicated Leonard's competitors. Though the arrangement was not direct collusion, lines of confidentiality blurred. She frequently found herself second-guessing whether the details she possessed could be used against Leonard's rivals. More and more, she saw the grey areas in which business, law, and morality intersected. One evening, Isabel came home to find Leonard pacing by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city lights. A manila folder lay open on the marble coffee table. She recognized it immediately as a dossier containing confidential information about one of Leonard's biggest market threats. Startled, she demanded to know how he had acquired such sensitive documents. Leonard offered a dismissive shrug, implying that the specifics were unimportant. As he saw it, knowledge was power, and he was merely protecting his empire. But the methods he employed were chilling. Could a single line in the document have been gleaned from a private conversation? Isabel had at her law firm. She felt nauseated at the thought. The wedge of mistrust between them drove deeper. Leonard believed that Isabel's professional network was an asset, a goldmine of insights into legal strategies that could jeopardize or bolster his acquisitions. Each time she balked at his subtle requests for information, he would expertly shift the blame. "I thought we were a team," he would whisper in a tone that melded wounded pride with veiled reproach. "Don't you trust me?" She, in turn, began to see the complexities of her husband's empire not as accomplishments, but as ticking time bombs of ethical dilemmas. Disillusionment seeped into her perception of him. Still, she tried to salvage their marriage by focusing on the aspects of Leonard she admired: his intellect, his relentless pursuit of success, his moments of generosity. But the more she tried to emphasize the good, the more glaring the bad became. Whispers of corporate espionage began to swirl around Leonard's name in professional circles. A rival CEO from Seattle claimed that Leonard had orchestrated a smear campaign to devalue the competitor's stock. The official statement from Leonard's camp denied all allegations, labeling them as baseless rumors spread by envious adversaries. Isabel wanted to believe it was all hearsay. Yet, she recalled the manila folder on their coffee table. The lines of ethical propriety were blurring at an alarming rate. On the surface, the Greenwood marriage still presented a unified front to the paparazzi and the tabloids. They appeared at charity galas, arm in arm, glowing under the flash of cameras. But behind the scenes, a different reality unfolded. Their arguments escalated into midnight, shouting matches that ended in tears. Leonard's spending grew even more extravagant, almost compulsively so: brand new sports cars, private jet getaways, lavish dinners with foreign dignitaries. Meanwhile, Isabel found herself retreating emotionally, confiding in her close friend and colleague, Miranda, about her fears. Miranda, a seasoned attorney with a firm moral compass, warned Isabel that power corrupts even the brightest minds. She cautioned her not to become complicit in Leonard's potential wrongdoing. If he was crossing lines, she needed to either stand up to him or distance herself. Isabel vacillated, torn by love, loyalty, and the glimmer of hope that Leonard might still be the idealist she once admired. Inevitably, the tension reached a breaking point. Late one night, Isabel confronted Leonard about a rumor involving offshore accounts. She demanded transparency. She deserved the truth. Leonard's demeanor changed from cunning to cold in a flash. He scoffed at her concerns, calling them inconsequential details, reaffirming that she did not have the full picture of what it took to maintain a global empire. Then he fired back with allegations that she was meddling in affairs she couldn't comprehend, implying that she owed her own professional success, in part, to his resources and influence. The words stung like a slap. Isabel realized with painful clarity that Leonard might see her not as an equal partner, but as an asset to be controlled or discarded. The final blow came when he insisted on prenuptial clauses that effectively limited her share if the marriage dissolved. The prenuptial had always existed, but Leonard now wanted modifications clauses that would heavily penalize her for disclosing confidential business matters in the event of a split. It was a move that reeked of paranoia. She refused, and in her refusal, she recognized the moment their marriage truly began to die. In the weeks that followed, their home became a war zone. Simple civilities vanished, replaced by curt nods and the occasional seething glare. They started sleeping in separate bedrooms. Publicly, they still appeared at events together, though the forced smiles and stiff embraces were easy to spot for those who knew them well. Gossip columns speculated that the it couple was on the rocks. Leonard's PR team swiftly downplayed such rumors, but the cracks were too visible to ignore. It was Isabel who finally took the decisive step, realizing that her mental health, her ethics, and her sense of self were being eroded. She moved out. She packed her things while Leonard was away on a business trip, a suspiciously timed trip that some believed was a clandestine rendezvous with overseas partners. In a mix of heartbreak and resolve, she left a note that read, "I can't be part of your world of illusions anymore." The note, short as it was, shook Leonard. He returned to an empty home, echoing with the memory of her presence. For a brief moment, pangs of regret flashed through him. He had cared for Isabel in his own way. But any remorse was quickly superseded by his indignation. He saw her departure as a betrayal, a threat to the empire he had built. And so, even as heartbreak coiled in his chest, a plan formed in his mind. He would protect what was his at all costs. Word spread fast once lawyers became involved. Isabel filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences and more discreetly emotional manipulation and business-related intimidation. Leonard's immediate response was swift and ruthless. He countersued, claiming that Isabel had breached confidentiality and was seeking to exploit sensitive company information. In reality, his countersuit was a strategic move to leverage the legal system as a weapon against her. Those who knew Isabel were outraged. The once warm, kind-hearted genius had transformed into a figure of intimidation. His legal team threatened to reveal private details that could tarnish her reputation, painting her as opportunistic. Overnight, a wave of negative press about Isabel swept across media outlets, seemingly friendly to Leonard. She was portrayed as ungrateful, conniving, and looking for a big payout. The irony was that she had walked away from most of Leonard's wealth, only requesting a fair settlement. Surrounded by a media storm, Isabel found an unlikely ally in a junior journalist named Eric Walters, who was investigating questionable practices within Leonard's company. Eric's research linked multiple shell corporations and offshore accounts to Leonard's empire. The trail hinted at corporate espionage, tax evasion, and hush money for key individuals who might otherwise speak out. Though lacking the full scope of evidence, Isabel realized that by cooperating with Eric, she might uncover the leverage Leonard held over her and possibly even exonerate herself from his damaging accusations. The tension leading to the final trial was palpable. Leonard's once sterling reputation showed the first signs of tarnish as rumors about unethical dealings reached the ears of mainstream media. His public relations team doubled its efforts to preserve his golden image. Meanwhile, Isabel fortified her legal strategy with the help of her firm and certain confidants who believed in her innocence. Friends of the couple took sides. A few, still dazzled by Leonard's power and wealth, condemned Isabel as a traitor. Others rallied to her defense, citing the controlling nature they had witnessed in Leonard over the years. People who once vied for invitations to the Greenwood mansion now whispered about how the mighty empire might be teetering on the brink. Some predicted a swift settlement. Others relished the drama, eagerly awaiting the day in court when hidden truths would explode into the public eye. By the time the trial date was set, the stage was well and truly established. On one side, Leonard, the revered tech genius, a multi-millionaire with an army of lawyers, influence in high places, and a drive to defend his empire at any cost. On the other, Isabel, the principled attorney whose integrity had been battered, but not broken, by the manipulations of her husband. Unbeknownst to the public, new evidence had emerged, startling revelations that threatened to disrupt not just the trial, but the entire empire Leonard had painstakingly built. The morning of the trial dawned bright and clear, belying the storm raging beneath the surface. News crews swarmed the courthouse, hungry for any scrap of drama. Spectators lined up, many unable to find seating in the packed gallery. Some had come out of sympathy for Isabel, others were there to support the magnetic Leonard Greenwood. Still others simply craved spectacle. Metal detectors beeped incessantly as attendees filed inside. Cameras flashed, capturing each tense movement. Leonard's legal team marched in a tight formation, their suits immaculate, their expressions stern. Isabel arrived with her own counsel, her posture betraying a mixture of nerves and quiet determination. The tension was palpable, like compressed thunderclouds ready to burst. Whispers filled the corridors. Is she going to reveal something big? Did he really hide money offshore? I heard she has a secret recording. Impossible! Leonard wouldn't risk his reputation like that. Journalists tweeted in real time, stoking speculation. A few celebrity onlookers arrived just to see the fireworks firsthand, some wearing sunglasses indoors to appear inconspicuous. One of them was a famous pop star who had once invested in Leonard's company. People craned their necks to see reactions, to glean insider information, and to read the tension etched across faces. The crowd hushed as the bailiff called the court to order. The judge, an experienced jurist known for a no-nonsense approach, surveyed the packed room. She made it clear from the start that theatrics would not sway her rulings. Both parties were to stick to evidence, facts, and verifiable testimonies. What neither side realized was that the biggest bombshell was yet to be dropped, a revelation that would transcend typical. He said, she said spats, and exposed something far darker behind. Leonard's carefully crafted persona. Meanwhile, Leonard maintained an outward air of confidence. He nodded politely at the judge, conferred quietly with his lawyers, and occasionally shot glances in Isabel's direction. Yet, beneath the surface, his heart pounded with a growing sense of dread. In his vault of hidden transgressions, certain secrets were far too damaging to see the light of day. If Isabel had uncovered them, everything he had built, everything, would be at risk. Before proceedings officially began, the judge asked both parties if there were any preliminary matters. Leonard's lawyers rose, requesting the suppression of specific documents related to trade secrets. Isabel's counsel objected, arguing that these documents contained evidence vital to proving Leonard's manipulation and intimidation. The judge took the matter under advisement, setting the tone for a contentious trial. As the gallery observed the exchange, it became evident that something more profound than a simple divorce settlement was on the line. It wasn't just about money or property. It was about power, ethics, and the lengths to which a man like Leonard Greenwood would go to maintain the pristine image of a visionary entrepreneur. With the stage set, each passing moment brought them closer to the cataclysmic collision of truth and lies that would forever alter their futures. The first day of trial began with opening statements. Leonard's lead attorney, a seasoned litigator named Marshall O'Connell, painted Isabel as a vindictive woman, scorned a woman who had weaponized the legal system to exact revenge on a successful spouse. To bolster his claims, he cited her firm's role in major corporate lawsuits and suggested she had direct ties to Leonard's business rivals. With confident flourishes, O'Connell portrayed Leonard as a visionary whose only fault was placing too much trust in the wrong person. The gallery listened raptly, some nodding along, others bristling at the insinuations. When Isabel's counsel stood, the tone shifted from condescending to chillingly factual. Carefully selected words hinted at a hidden narrative. They spoke of intimidation, manipulation, and meticulously documented patterns of psychological coercion. They mentioned the possibility that Leonard might have resorted to underhanded tactics to secure his fortune. Though they had yet to present hard evidence, the implication was clear. The case went far beyond the typical he said, she said divorce proceedings. Soon after, witnesses took the stand. The first were former employees of Leonard, some who had parted amicably, others who had been dismissed under mysterious circumstances. A programmer testified that he had once discovered lines of code in the company's flagship product, designed to spy on competitor software. A personal assistant tearfully recounted being pressured to forge signatures on documents that were then used to silence a whistleblower. Each testimony, though damaging, still lacked the definitive proof needed to dismantle Leonard's towering defense. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. Isabel's team produced an envelope of documents that they claimed would lay bare Leonard's darkest secret. The court fell silent as copies were passed around. Skepticism mingled with anticipation. Everyone wondered if the so-called bombshell evidence was truly as explosive as advertised. Inside the envelope were records of sizable payments made to multiple shell corporations located in tax havens. The amounts were staggering, but that alone might not have been enough to sink Leonard. Many wealthy individuals utilized offshore accounts to shield their assets. However, the documents also featured a correspondence trail, emails, and letters that traced the transactions back to hush money deals. These deals involved paying off individuals who had discovered the questionable practices in Leonard's company and had threatened to go public. Among the payees were developers, data analysts, and at least one government official responsible for overseeing tech regulations. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Leonard's legal team erupted in objection, calling the evidence fraudulent and inadmissible. But the judge allowed the documents to remain on record, stating that the defense would have ample opportunity to challenge their authenticity. For the first time since the trial began, Leonard looked visibly unnerved. If these records were proven genuine, they would unmask his carefully orchestrated empire of deceit. An undercurrent of excitement electrified the spectators. Journalists furiously typed at their laptops, social media ablaze with headlines such as "Beverly Hills tech mogul in hot water and shocking leak threatens Greenwood fortune." A sense of vindication passed over those who had long suspected Leonard's unscrupulous tactics. But the man at the center of it all refused to buckle so easily. Though beads of sweat dotted his forehead, he clenched his jaw and locked eyes with Isabel. In that moment, it was as if he silently vowed that he would never let her break him. The second day of the trial built upon the revelations of the first. Isabel's attorneys drilled deeper into the financial records, linking them to real cases where employees had mysteriously vanished from the industry after receiving hefty payouts. One developer claimed he had been threatened with baseless lawsuits if he ever spoke about the suspicious code he uncovered. Another testified that she had seen Leonard personally authorize large wire transfers to obscure accounts. Leonard's defense fought back with vigor. They argued that any hush payments, if they existed at all, were standard non-disclosure settlements, common practice in the competitive tech industry to protect intellectual property. They insisted that the so-called corruption allegations were a fabrication, part of a smear campaign orchestrated by Isabel and her allies. In a dramatic flourish, O'Connell even suggested that Isabel might have tampered with company documents to frame Leonard. Each time her team presented new evidence, the defense would counter with alternative explanations or raise procedural objections to delay the impact. But Isabel's side had one final card to play. Eric Walters, the investigative journalist who had spent months digging into Leonard's dealings. Called to the stand, Eric testified about leaked documents and insider interviews. He revealed that he had initially approached Isabel when rumors of her divorce surfaced because he believed she might corroborate his findings. With meticulous detail, Eric outlined a pattern of intimidation and quiet payoffs, painting a disturbing portrait of Leonard as a man bent on domination, not just success. This testimony shook the courtroom. The defense attempted to discredit Eric as a sensationalist reporter. Yet, Eric provided evidence of his own, a trove of emails between Leonard's top executives, referencing damage control and financial neutralization. Leonard's face hardened into a mask. He recognized the precarious position he was in, yet refused to show any outward sign of defeat. Then came the climactic moment that caused an audible intake of breath from nearly everyone present. Isabel took the stand. Dressed in a modest black suit, she walked with a purposeful gait. She began by recounting the early days of their marriage, describing Leonard's charm and ambition. Her voice trembled as she spoke of how she had loved his passion and determination. But as she continued, her voice steadied with resolve. She described the manipulative tactics Leonard had used against her, how he had tried to siphon privileged information from her legal work, how he belittled her concerns, and how he coerced her into signing non-disclosure agreements that tethered her not just to him, but to the moral ambiguities of his empire. She recounted nights when he would pressure her relentlessly to glean details about opposing counsel's strategies. And in a hushed voice, she spoke of an incident in which Leonard threatened to sever her ties to the legal community if she dared to leave him or speak out. Tears welled in her eyes when she described the emotional toll, how she doubted her own judgment and even her own sanity. Yet, in a remarkable display of composure, she reiterated that her aim was not to destroy Leonard's accomplishments or to claim an unearned share of his wealth, but to expose the unethical empire he had built. As Isabel concluded her testimony, a tense stillness wrapped the courtroom. Leonard stared at her with a mixture of anger and perhaps a hint of regret. It was as though he realized, in that suspended moment, how far they had fallen from the love they once shared. The quiet, however, was fleeting. The defense launched into cross-examination, questioning Isabel's motives, her allegiances, and her proofs. Yet she held steady, responding calmly, methodically rebuffing their insinuations. Over the course of the day, the atmosphere grew increasingly volatile. Leonard occasionally whispered directives to his attorneys, shaking his head vigorously whenever a piece of evidence or testimony seemed particularly incriminating. Onlookers recognized that a pivotal battle was unfolding, not just over money or reputation, but over the soul of the empire Leonard had built, and possibly over the integrity of the woman he once professed to love. The media outside the courthouse had transformed into a circus. Reporters jockeyed for live coverage spots. Pundits debated the likelihood of Leonard's downfall on national television. Even a few picketers appeared, some voicing support for Isabel, others chanting that Leonard was the victim of an opportunistic ex-wife. Social media platforms were flooded with hashtags, #Greenwood Trial, #Tech Corruption, #Truth Will Prevail. Through it all, Leonard maintained a carefully curated facade of indignation and shock, though each revelation seemed to carve into that veneer. He still believed he could control the narrative, that he could turn the tide by discrediting witnesses or producing exculpatory evidence. But the question loomed, was it too late? By the end of that second day, the sense of an impending climax weighed heavily in the courtroom. The defense planned to call key witnesses the next morning, individuals who would cast doubt on Isabel's credibility and poke holes in Eric Walters' reporting. But would it be enough to counter the mountain of evidence and eyewitness accounts piling up against Leonard? As the gavel struck, signaling the day's adjournment, spectators spilled out into the corridors. Buzzing phones and frenzied conversations filled the air. Isabel stepped outside, flanked by her lawyers. Flashes popped as photographers snapped her photo, capturing both the relief and anxiety etched on her face. Leonard exited moments later, ignoring shouted questions from reporters. He retreated behind tinted car windows, disappearing into the Los Angeles traffic like a spectre haunted by the ghosts of his own making. Unbeknownst to them both, the following days would bring the trial to a crescendo that neither side could have foreseen, a crescendo that would see a powerful man's psyche laid bare for all to witness, and a reckoning of karmic proportions. The third day of the trial opened with the defense's attempt to stage a counterattack. They introduced experts who argued that the so-called hush money documents could easily be forged. They questioned the authenticity of the signatures, the email timestamps, and the software used to create them. A forensic accountant hired by Leonard insisted that while some funds had been routed overseas, the transactions were part of legal tax optimization strategies, not illicit bribes. Observing from the gallery, Isabel felt her confidence waver. She had faith in her legal team, yet the defense's polished presentations sowed seeds of doubt among onlookers. At times, their arguments seemed plausible enough to muddy the waters. Leonard's lawyers hammered home the narrative that Isabel was collaborating with tabloids and disgruntled ex-employees to fabricate a story. The aim was clear: to transform a scandalous pile of evidence into the ambiguous fruit of an elaborate conspiracy. For a moment, the crowd seemed to teeter in uncertainty, wondering if perhaps Leonard was indeed the victim. Then the defense called upon a character, witness a wealthy philanthropist named Clara Hastings, who had served on the board of Leonard's foundation. Clara spoke glowingly of Leonard's charitable endeavors, portraying him as a man of compassion and vision. She recounted how he had donated significant sums to children's hospitals and scholarships. The undercurrent was an attempt to highlight a softer, philanthropic side, overshadowing the claims of greed and malice. Her testimony did resonate. Even Isabel found herself remembering the acts of kindness Leonard had shown, the spontaneous donations, the heartfelt speeches he gave when awarding scholarships, the times he had genuinely helped people in need. For a flicker of a moment, she questioned whether she had painted him in too harsh a light, forgetting the shades of grey that made up their turbulent marriage. But the recollection of threats, manipulation, and illegal payoffs drowned that moment of hesitation. Next, Leonard's lead attorney called an expert on psychological manipulation, an academic whose credentials were disputed by Isabel's team. He argued that Isabel might be experiencing a form of emotional transference, suggesting she had projected her own fears and doubts onto Leonard. To onlookers, it felt like a stretch, yet the cross-examination exposed the tension between subjective experience and objective fact. At its core, the trial hinged on evidence, but emotional narratives also swayed hearts and minds. Midway through the third day, a surprise witness emerged, a former confidant of Leonard's named Douglas Riley. No one had expected Douglas to testify. He had vanished from the tech scene years earlier under murky circumstances. He had been an early investor in Leonard's first startup and later parted ways. The exact reasons for their split had never been disclosed, but rumors suggested a massive falling out that involved significant sums of money. When Douglas took the stand, the gallery erupted in hushed whispers. He looked visibly worn, deep lines carving his face. His eyes flickered nervously around the courtroom. After a long pause, he began to speak, his voice trembling. He recalled how he and Leonard had been close friends, how they had burned the midnight oil together writing code for the initial prototype. But as soon as the company started to gain traction, Leonard had grown increasingly secretive and possessive. Then came the bombshell. Douglas revealed that Leonard had coerced him into signing a binding, non-disclosure agreement after a financial dispute. He provided bank records indicating a significant payout to keep him silent about questionable coding practices and tactics used during the startup's growth phase. In halting, raw detail, he described how Leonard had threatened to label him a liar, an embezzler, and a drug addict, anything to ensure that Douglas would not undermine his ascent to tech stardom. Leonard's defense went on the offensive, questioning Douglas's credibility and motives. They implied that he harbored a grudge and was seeking vengeance. Yet, the jury seemed riveted by Douglas's authenticity. When pressed, he admitted he was far from innocent. He had accepted Leonard's payout out of fear and greed. But guilt had gnawed at him for years, compelling him to step forward. As he spoke, tears glistened in his eyes, and the gallery sensed his remorse. Douglas's testimony dealt a severe blow to Leonard's credibility. Combined with the hush money documents, it created a pattern of behavior too similar to be mere coincidence. The cracks in Leonard's defense grew more visible by the minute. Gone was the assured smirk he had worn on the trial's opening day. Instead, he sat rigid, jaw clenched, occasionally exchanging pointed whispers with his lawyers. Outside the courthouse, the media frenzy escalated further. News vans parked in rows, competing for vantage points. People camped on sidewalks, holding signs and wearing T-shirts emblazoned with slogans like "Justice for Isabel" or "I stand with Leonard." Some of the mogul's staunchest supporters still believed in his innocence, dismissing Douglas, Eric Walters, and other witnesses as opportunists or charlatans. But many spectators, and even some former admirers, began to question if the philanthropic genius they revered was merely a facade. As day turned to evening, the court adjourned once more. Cameras captured Leonard walking to his car, head down, avoiding the barrage of shouted questions. Isabel watched from a distance, torn between pity and resolve. She recalled the early days, the laughter they shared over morning coffee, the thoughtful notes he used to leave on her desk, and the proud moment of announcing their engagement. How had it come to this public spectacle of accusations and betrayals? Amid the chaos, Isabel's friend Miranda approached her. Miranda had been following every detail, offering support and legal insights. "He's losing his grip," Miranda whispered, eyeing Leonard's retreating figure. "We need to stay strong, but be prepared. A cornered man is at his most dangerous." Isabel nodded, heart heavy. She knew that if Leonard felt cornered, he might orchestrate one final gambit. He had never been one to go down without a fight, and the next day's proceedings promised even more fireworks. Behind closed doors, Leonard and his team worked late into the night, strategizing. Rumor had it they might produce documents implicating Isabel in a conflict of interest at her law firm, perhaps an email or recorded conversation that could tarnish her credibility. Others whispered that Leonard was prepared to make a high-stakes settlement offer, one so lucrative that Isabel might be tempted to drop the entire case. But those speculations paled in comparison to the revelation that would unfold on the fourth day. Hidden in the labyrinth of Leonard's secrets was a truth so incendiary it threatened not just his empire or the divorce settlement, but the entire facade of control he had meticulously built. By the start of the fourth day, tension was at an all-time high. Crowds gathered before dawn, hoping for a seat inside. Someone sold homemade T-shirts emblazoned with caricatures of Leonard and Isabel. Another entrepreneurial soul sold Team Isabel and Team Leonard badges. The local coffee shops thrived on the chaos, lines spilling onto the sidewalk. Inside the courthouse, lawyers shuffled heavy boxes of evidence, sorting files and whispering last-minute tactics. Journalists rehearsed their live segments, adjusting camera angles. The judge, stoic as ever, sipped coffee and prepared for the tumult, sure to greet her once court was in session. Rumor had it that a special security detail had been assigned in case the tension boiled over into confrontation. One could feel the electricity in the air, a potent mix of fear, anticipation, and a desire for closure. In one corner, Isabel prayed silently for the truth to be enough, that justice would prevail despite Leonard's resources. In another, Leonard straightened his tie, stared into the mirror, and steeled himself. His reflection stared back, revealing the hairline cracks forming in his carefully cultivated persona. He was a millionaire on trial, not just in the legal sense, but in the court of public opinion. And public opinion, fickle as it was, seemed poised to turn on him if a single damning piece of evidence pierced the remaining defenses. No one could have predicted the emotional climax that lay ahead. But one thing was certain. The next chapter in the Greenwood divorce trial would be as explosive as the hush-money evidence and Douglas's shocking testimony combined. The stage was set for truth to stand bare, for illusions to shatter, and for consequences to rain down on those who had woven lies into the fabric of their reality. The fourth day of trial dawned with an almost eerie silence in the courthouse corridors. Gone was the earlier chatter. In its place hovered a sense of impending revelation. Isabel arrived early, scanning the faces around her, sensing the heightened tension. She could see it in the way the bailiffs moved, extra cautious, as if bracing for a storm. Once the court was in session, Leonard's attorneys made a last-ditch effort to discredit Isabel's case. They introduced a series of emails purportedly showing she had advised a rival company on how to undermine one of Leonard's key acquisitions. The defense argued that these emails were proof of her vendetta, her willingness to collude with anyone who might harm Leonard's empire. At first glance, the emails seemed damning, but Isabel's team quickly produced metadata indicating they had been doctored. The judge agreed to further examine the authenticity, leaving the question unresolved for the moment. The crossfire continued with each side, producing more documents, more statements, more claims of deception. Tensions reached a boiling point when Leonard, unable to contain his frustration, demanded permission to speak directly to the court. His lawyers tried to dissuade him, but he insisted. The judge allowed a brief statement, cautioning him to remain respectful and factual. Leonard rose and addressed the courtroom. His voice shook with anger as he claimed that the entire trial was a conspiracy designed to sabotage everything he had built. He insisted that Isabel was the puppet of his enemies, that the hush-money allegations were exaggerated, and that his philanthropic work alone should prove his moral character. His words were fiery, but his delivery bordered on desperation. He sounded less like a wrong genius and more like a cornered animal lashing out. Then the unexpected happened. In the middle of Leonard's tirade, Isabel's counsel requested permission to play an audio recording obtained from a secure source. The judge, after a brief deliberation, allowed it. What followed was a voice unmistakably belonging to Leonard, instructing one of his executives to fix a problem by any means necessary. The conversation referenced intimidation of a whistleblower and made clear that if this person refused to cooperate, we'll make sure they never work in tech again. The tone was cold, calculated, leaving little room for alternative interpretations. The courtroom fell into stunned silence. Leonard's face drained of color. Even some members of his own legal team exchanged uneasy glances. This wasn't a mere rumor or a second-hand account. It was his voice, explicitly condoning unethical, potentially illegal tactics. The carefully spun defense that Leonard was simply misunderstood began to crumble before everyone's eyes. The judge called a short recess. During the break, whispers turned into fervent discussions. The recording was trending on every social media platform within minutes. Major news outlets broadcast sound bites of Leonard's ominous words, and public sentiment took a dramatic turn. Even those who had staunchly defended him found it difficult to reconcile the philanthropic hero. They admired with the voice advocating professional and personal destruction for dissenters. When proceedings resumed, Leonard's attorneys attempted damage control. They argued that the recording was taken out of context, that Leonard had been joking or using figurative language. Yet, the gravity of the statements echoed too loudly to be dismissed. The judge questioned Leonard directly, seeking clarification. Sweating and visibly shaken, he offered a clumsy explanation about protecting trade secrets, but his words rang hollow. Everything Leonard had fought to preserve began collapsing like a house of cards. One by one, witnesses emboldened by the new revelations came forward, confirming that his intimidating behavior was not a one-off lapse in judgment, but a pattern. Some recounted how they were encouraged to lie about product flaws to shareholders. Others described being coerced to sign broad confidentiality agreements under threat of financial ruin. At one point, Leonard seemed on the verge of panic. His carefully curated composure gave way to a tremor in his hands. His eyes darted about, seeking an escape from a situation that had spiraled beyond his control. It was a jarring contrast to the confident mogul who had once swaggered across magazine covers and philanthropic stages. Meanwhile, Isabel watched the proceedings with a sense of grim resolve. She had not come to gloat over her husband's downfall. Despite her anger and the deep scars he had inflicted, a part of her mourned the man she once loved. She recognized he was crumbling under the weight of his own misdeeds, that everything he had built was now tainted by an indefensible streak of cruelty and deceit. The final blow came when Eric Walters, the investigative journalist, produced yet another piece of evidence, an internal memo from Leonard to his high-level staff, detailing how to systematically bury negative press by funding smear campaigns against certain journalists and rival entrepreneurs. The memo was methodical, clinical, offering step-by-step instructions that left no doubt of its authenticity. The judge's face hardened as she reviewed it. She had permitted Leonard ample leeway to defend himself against accusations, but now his empire of smoke and mirrors lay in tatters. With a weary sigh, she declared that sufficient evidence existed to warrant further criminal investigation. She adjourned the session to deliberate on immediate rulings related to the divorce settlement, spousal support, and the potential invalidation of Leonard's more restrictive prenuptial clauses. As the judge stood and turned to exit, Leonard did something no one expected. All the fight drained from him, he collapsed into his chair and buried his face in his hands. Sobs racked his body in raw waves that silenced even the most cynical observers. The room, once filled with so much tension, now stood frozen in a stunned hush. Billionaire moguls were not supposed to cry in public, but here he was, reduced to tears by the avalanche of his own actions catching up with him. Isabel watched him, tears pricking her own eyes. She'd wished for truth, for accountability, but she had never imagined seeing Leonard so broken. She stood there, torn between the memory of their young love and the undeniable harm he had caused. As the bailiffs carefully approached Leonard, she felt her own chest tighten. This was the price of hubris, the cost of playing puppeteer with people's lives. Reporters outside the courthouse shouted their questions. Cameras captured every angle of Leonard's humiliation, and the hashtag Greenwood Meltdown trended globally within minutes. Legal analysts declared that although the divorce was almost certainly concluding in Isabel's favor, Leonard now faced an array of potential criminal charges for conspiracy, fraud, and intimidation. The man who once proudly donned Rolex watches and hosted lavish Beverly Hills galas might soon see the inside of a courtroom again, but this time as a criminal defendant. The day ended in a flurry of urgent phone calls, press releases, and stunned disbelief. Isabel and her team quietly left the courthouse, turning down multiple interview requests. She felt an exhaustion deeper than any she had known. Yet, beneath the fatigue lay a profound sense of relief and something akin to sorrowful victory. She had spoken her truth. She had exposed the rot beneath Leonard's gleaming empire, but the final chapter was still unwritten. There would be appeals, settlements, possible prison time. The public's fascination would eventually wane, replaced by a new scandal. Yet for the moment, the saga of Leonard and Isabel Greenwood had reached a point of no return, an unmasking of illusions, a grand reckoning that had shattered not only a marriage, but the myth of an untouchable tech mogul. And in that shattering, perhaps, lay the seeds of a new beginning for Isabel and a well-deserved retribution for Leonard, guided by the inescapable law of karma. The final gavel came down 2 weeks later. The divorce was granted in Isabel's favor, the prenuptial's restrictive clauses declared void. She walked away with a fair settlement enough to rebuild her life, but far less than Leonard's once unfathomable fortune. More importantly, she regained her sense of self and her faith in the law. Outside the courthouse, reporters clamored for an interview, but she simply offered a short statement. "Truth should never be for sale," she said, "and love without respect is no love at all." Her words resonated, echoing the hard lessons learned by everyone who witnessed the trial. Leonard, under investigation for multiple charges, found his empire crumbling. In a bitter twist of fate, the same media outlets that once exalted him now dissected his downfall. Karma, it seemed, had come full circle. If you found this story gripping, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more compelling content.